I was willing to take a risk on myself. I think for a lot of us, we're just too afraid to take that risk. Like, what if I try this and it fails?
Welcome to the In-Between, a space for anyone navigating from the familiar to the unknown. Whether you're facing a personal, professional, or spiritual disruption, these conversations are here to help guide you through the questions, uncertainties, and opportunities that come with change. Hear from leaders, thinkers, and storytellers who found their way forward, and learn how you can too. No matter where you're starting, you don't have to navigate this alone. Today, I'm excited to welcome Eric Hoke to the show. Eric has lived the tension many pastors feel, balancing ministry in the church with a calling to serve in the marketplace. From planting churches in New York City to becoming a corporate trainer, author, and coach, Eric has helped thousands of pastors discover how to sustain their ministries while thriving in new professional spaces. With 15 years of ministry experience and a career coaching background, Eric has unique insights into navigating transitions, identifying transferable skills, and embracing bivocational and covocational ministry as a long-term strategy. So, Eric, thank you for being here. I first came across Eric on X or Twitter. If you're on there, he's a great follow. You know, your journey has, in my opinion, been anything but ordinary. You know, church planner, corporate trainer, author, advocate for bivocational pastors. I love it. Super interesting. Can you share a bit of your story? How did you go from small town upbringing to planting churches in NYC and now equipping pastors to thrive in ministry in the marketplace?
Man, Evan, thank you so much for inviting me. I'll try to answer that as quickly as possible. So I did grow up in a small town in central Pennsylvania, though I had a bit of a hybrid upbringing because half of my family lived in New York City and New Jersey. My grandparents actually met in New York City at Riverside Church, and then ended up moving to central Pennsylvania where my mom met my dad, who had been in that community for 4 generations. So even from a very young age, I kind of felt like a little bit of a pull into both worlds, the urban world and the rural world. I took the traditional path of ministry, Bible college and seminary. I was a youth pastor in New Jersey, and my joke is that I drank the Tim Keller Kool-Aid of church planting in large cities. I was also influenced by others as well. My wife has family who planted churches in Berlin, Germany, and places like this. So that was kind of in my blood, both from the beginning of marriage and also my upbringing as well. So here I was, 23, 24 years old, youth pastor in Jersey, and thought, I'm going to go to New York City and plant a church. And I ended up relocating to the Bronx, the South Bronx of New York City, which for those not familiar with New York, there's 5 boroughs. The Bronx is the one in the north, the northernmost borough, and also the most underserved borough of the 5 in New York City. While I was there, I attended a church plant led by a Puerto Rican brother and learned from him, and I submitted to his leadership for 3 years and then was sent out to plant my own church, which started around my living room in our apartment in 2016 with our public launch in 2017. So I'm not the best guy in the world with math, but it was pretty obvious that when you're serving a really underserved community, one of the poorest communities in America, in the most expensive city in the world, church planting is not a very lucrative path to sustainability. So I thought, well, I'll pursue this whole bivo-covo thing for a season, and then once the church can kind of get to a size to sustain my salary, then I'll go full-time and quote-unquote be a real pastor again. Well, the joke was kind of on me because the church never got to that size, but in the course of those 7 years, including leading through COVID, I had more and more people kind of coming to me and asking, like, how'd you sustain this ministry through this pandemic and this really difficult place? And really the only thing I could point to was the fact that I had another job, another source of income outside of the church. And that was kind of the genesis story of ihelppastorsgetjobs.com, which is about to be 3 years old, and Market Street Pastor, which is the book that just came out about a month ago, of kind of helping pastors think through covocational, bivocational ministry as a long-term strategy for ministry sustainability, whether you're church planting in the inner city like I was, or you're pastoring a small country church of 40 people. It can work on both ends of the spectrum.
Congrats on both of the launch of that book and all the success you're having helping pastors. So it sounds like the dynamics that you were experiencing in an expensive city
Uh-huh.
in a lower income area,
Uh-huh.
really kind of not force the hand, but maybe so,
Sure.
kind of put you in that position where that was a route that you were going to have to go if you were going to make it work. What were some of the biggest questions that you wrestled with as you kind of made that decision or stepped into bivocational?
I think the biggest one was the question of identity. As I shared in my previously, I had gone a traditional route of Bible college, seminary, kind of full-time vocational church ministry. I'd worked in medium and large size churches, everything from kind of more traditional to more seeker sensitive, and really wrestling with, well, if I have another job outside of pastoring this church, am I a quote unquote real pastor anymore? Am I actually doing what God's called me to do? Is my day job actually a distraction from what God's truly called me to do? That was dissolved pretty quickly though, Evan, because I was recognizing I'm having such rich opportunities to minister to people in the workplace that would never wander into my church. And there's a million reasons why they wouldn't wander in, as practical as they live in a totally different part of the city, that coming to the Bronx on a Sunday morning would be out of the cards, to they're not Christians, they're atheists, they're Jewish, they're former Catholics, whatever they might be. But by building trust and rapport with them, I was able to minister to them in a way that I could not just as a pastor. So I think that was the interesting thing about it, is I kind of walked in feeling a little bit like, oh yeah, I'll do this for a while, recognizing a few years in, oh, this is actually a lot of fun. I feel able to have a ministry in both places. But even beyond that, I was able to develop a model for ministry. We never were a large church, and I'm not shy about that. But we had multiple people kind of pitching in at a high level to kind of help move the ministry forward, which I think is kind of the unique X factor of the co-vocational pastor, is that he or she is a true equiper of saints. And I think when I was a solo or a full-time pastor, I just constantly felt this burden of like, well, I'm paid to do this, they're not, therefore I should do everything A to Z, ending up frustrated and annoyed of, why am I going to Costco and buying snacks for youth group for the third time this month? Or whatever it might be, because I feel like, well, I'm the full-time guy, so therefore I need to do that, and recognizing, oh, I can be freed up to focus on what matters most, and delegating and eliminating the rest. So that opportunity to serve in the marketplace, as well as an empowered team to carry out the ministry, was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed that.
So how did there's a couple mindsets or perspectives that I heard that sounded like you potentially overcame or had to wrestle through. One, well, if I'm bivocational, am I really a pastor? What does this mean for my calling? How did you, I'm going to ask two questions. How did you, one, work through that? And then the second is empowering and delegating others. I've been around leaders that it's challenging to do that because for all sorts of reasons, particularly pastors. Those two headspaces, what does this mean? Am I really a pastor? And not holding too tightly onto things so that you can delegate and empower people. Was that something that came natural to you, or how did you kind of work through those mindsets?
Yeah, I wish they came natural. They most certainly didn't. I think in my worst moments, I'm definitely a control freak, and I want things done my way. I'll kind of answer your question by telling a story. The second question, I'll go back to the first question. The second one was the church that I led was extremely diverse. Most Sundays, my family was the only white family there. So we had Africans, African Americans, Latinos, Asians, you name it. I think at our highest point, we had 12 or 13 countries represented in our church. And one particular Sunday, we had a worship leader, extremely gifted, also extremely charismatic. I was ordained in the AG, but I'm not that charismatic. I'm a wannabe Presbyterian. And I told him after leading worship one Sunday, we're very early in our plant. We're probably 2 months in holding services. Like, hey man, I'm giving you 25 minutes to lead worship. 25 minutes, like, it's done. Pray and and let me come up, because everyone came here to hear me preach, obviously, right? That's why everyone comes to church to hear the pastor preach. So I told him that. And he led worship the next week, and he went over 25 minutes. He was like 35 or 40. Now, keep in mind, I'm a nerdy white guy. I'm in the South Bronx of New York City. I'm used to a structure and a rigid service. That's not culturally what's appropriate for that community. But I did not have the understanding of that at that time. So my wife and I are walking home from church. Our church met close to our apartment. We're walking home, and I said to her, "I'm going to fire our worship leader." She's like, "Well, why?" I said, "Because I told him last week, 25 minutes, any longer, like that's not acceptable because people came to hear me preach."
Mm-hmm.
And she said, "You need to quit being such an uptight white guy, get the stick out of your butt," something like that. Like she let me have it. She's like, "Everybody had a good time but you." Okay, like this community does not need a 60-minute compact service. They need a space for free-flowing worship, expression. That's what makes sense here. So like you have to get over yourself and let the guy have some space. And she was right. So I think like when you're planting a church cross-culturally, you have to kind of die to your preferences time and time again. Anybody who's crossed a culture to plant will kind of tell you that, or do ministry even. You can't go to a foreign country and say, well, back in America, here's how we do things. Not going to get very far. And in terms of the first one, the identity one, I certainly do think that was a challenge. However, it's not that hard to investigate scripture to recognize that there is no place in the New Testament where it says, unless you're full-time, the only source of income is a church, you're not a legit pastor. It's cultural. And, it's basically, it's a very small slice of the 2,000-year history of Christianity where you have a designated full-time salaried pastor to a church. That is actually the exception, not the rule, historically and globally.
So along the way, like at what point did you kind of stop thinking about maybe what you were leaving behind and start embracing what was next?
I don't know if I can pinpoint an exact moment, but I think somewhere around COVID-19. So New York City locked down very early and locked down for a considerable amount of time as well. I now live in Lancaster, PA, and I talked to people about their COVID experience, and it was like night and day of what we experienced in New York. So our church did not meet physically in our worship space for, I think, about 20 months. So just shy of 2 years. We would have small groups, we'd have outside gatherings, what have you, but actually physically meeting in our space did not happen for almost 2 years. We were meeting virtually for almost a year, just completely on Zoom. I just think through that, God had really had to remove sort of, here's what I think church is, here's what I think ministry is, here's what I think being a pastor is. I'm caring for people, I'm caring for my neighbors, I'm being the hands and feet of Christ, I'm doing what God's called me to do without the excess. And that was a real kind of wake up call to me of recognizing, what am I doing that's just above and beyond what God's called me to, what's outside of my gifting and my calling, and getting crystal clear on what can I do effectively, and zero in on that and let everything else kind of lay where it is.
So what were some of those initial steps? Like, how did you begin to zero in on those things that you were able to do effectively?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing that I did was, after we went back to in-person gatherings, I told my executive pastor, or not told him, but I asked him, I said, hey man, like, what are your thoughts of us splitting our sermon delivery every other week? You do one, I do one, we alternate. The reason for that is because at that point, my second daughter was born. She was born with severe medical complications. I had gone from a freelance job to a full-time job. All this has kind of happened during that 2020, 2021 season. And I recognized pretty quickly, like, you know what? I'm not going to be able to go back to the pre-COVID way of doing things when I just had one child, when I only had a freelance job. My life has become much more complicated. Let's kind of split those duties in half. So just the preaching alone, I went from preaching maybe 40 Sundays a year to preaching 25 Sundays a year, give or take a few. I think that was the first one. And the second thing as well was, when we went back to in-person gatherings, we went really focused on like bare bones, like we're going to have a service, and like that's all we're doing. We're not going to have a kids ministry for a time. We're not going to do anything above and beyond. We're going to focus on doing like Sunday services, and that being our primary focus. And I think having that level of consistency had really helped people understand, like, this is what our church does. This is kind of who we are. We're not trying to be all things to all people forever. We're trying to be uniquely who we are. But it was tough, man. I mean, we had to, like many churches, had to start over.
Mhm.
I don't think I ever shared this on a podcast before, but in February 2020, our church baptized 5 adults, all who were natives to New York City, natives to the Bronx, and you ask any church planter, like that's really amazing to be able to do that.
Mhm.
Not transfer growth, not someone's kid or teenager, but 5 adults, and then of course the world shut down a month later, so we had to start from scratch. But I think just getting really clear on hey, here's what I can realistically do and sustain, I think is an important thing for all of us, whether we're, in a global pandemic or not. You know how like, sorry, I was just gonna say like, you ever meet someone, maybe you've been that person, Evan, where it's like, man, once I get over this hump, things will slow down.
Oh yeah. 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 It doesn't happen. It does not happen.
The biggest lie we tell ourselves.
Why do you think pastors in particular have such a hard time letting go or even giving themselves permission for a season to just say, we're only going to do the things that we can do effectively, and we're only going to do things that we can do good. We're not going to try to be all things to all people. Why do you think that can be such a challenge for pastors?
Yeah, I'm gonna answer that kind of in 2 parts. The first part is, I think what happens in a lot of our churches, particularly like more established churches, historical churches, is you had that person who in 1984 really cared about Royal Rangers and invested in Royal Rangers, and let's get all these boys in Royal Rangers. For those who don't know what that is, that's like Christian Boy Scouts. And in 1986 they had 40 boys in Royal Rangers, and they went up to Vermont and they went kayaking and they slept in a tent. And in 1991 there was 70 kids, and they did all the, and like they have all these glory stories of how Royal Rangers served them. But then 2024 kids are more interested in iPads and Minecraft than they are with campfires and looking for berries. And Royal Rangers has 2 kids, and the
Yeah.
pastor says to the guy leading Royal Rangers, "Hey man, listen, we're putting a lot of money, a lot of time, and a lot of energy into this, and it's just not working any longer. I think we need to nix this." Well, now that guy's shattered. Those 2 kids' parents are shattered, but then even beyond that, that guy's uncle who started that 30 years ago calls the pastor and says, "How dare you? We did this." And those 40 kids whose lives were impacted 20 years ago, they call and they say, "Oh my gosh, I'm a Christian because I went on Royal Rangers." And all of a sudden, this pastor is receiving so much backlash because he's making the right decision, which is, this
Mm,
no longer works. Let's cut it. I
mm,
think for a lot of pastors, they'd rather not deal with that. So they know they need to make those tough decisions, but they know that the consequence of it is going to be, not worth it. The juice won't be worth the squeeze, as it were. So as a result, you have 30, 40 of those ministries firing on one cylinder as opposed to all cylinders, and nobody has the courage to say, you know what? Maybe that God uses for a season. Maybe that season is over. Let's celebrate all that God has done. Let's even have like a big campfire behind the church, and all the Royal Rangers come and tell our stories of Royal Rangers, and we thank God for what He's done. Nobody wants to
mhm,
have that tough conversation.
mhm,
The second thing I think is identity,
mhm,
right? I think for a lot of pastors, the feeling of our church does this, our church does this, our church does, we have a clothing closet, we have a food pantry, we have a women's ministry, we have a men's softball league, we have a youth group, we have a young adults, we have 18 ministries firing, makes them feel really good when they go to the pastor's luncheon and talk about how much the church is doing,
mm,
right? Nobody wants to be the guy that says, "Yeah, we have a Sunday service and a once a week small group. That's all we do." It's like, "Oh, that's all you do?" "Yeah, that's all we do." And they're both really, really good, and God's changing lives through it. That's all we do. We'd much rather be the guy that's, no, that church is doing a lot of good in the community, even if it's, like I said, 18 things kind of chugging along, as opposed to doing 1 or 2 things with excellence.
mhm. Yeah. I think there's a lot of uh, transferability there when we think about our own lives, particularly for those who are in the midst of transition or who are wrestling with um, a new season that is pending or around the corner. And one of the things you said that really stuck out to me is that this is no longer working.
Right.
I know for me, the last couple years of um, my involvement as a full-time pastor, I wouldn't have necessarily said it that way, but there were symptoms and signs and different indicators that this was no longer working. Um, but there's so many questions that get brought up and raised in the midst of that when something that you've done for so long seems to no longer be working, and you begin to get curious about what could be around the corner, or you start asking what if type questions. Well, what if? But there are so many unknowns when you start asking those types of questions. How did you start to discover which skill sets to use? You coach, you train other pastors. How did you begin to uncover some of those things that could help you move out of, well, if this isn't working anymore, if this part's not working anymore, but this part is, how did you start to understand that part and apply those things?
Yeah. I think there's a few things. The first one, I tell a story in the book, but I had a woman in our church. Her name was Gigi. Shout out to Gigi. And she was the first person to ever say to me, "No, Eric, you could consider a career as a corporate trainer." Like, Gigi, I went to seminary and I've worked in churches my whole life. Like, I don't even know what a corporate trainer is. How could I be one? She's like, charismatic, you're funny, you're well-spoken, you're relatable, you are smart, you have all these things going for you. Like, you can walk into a room and deliver really impactful leadership content, and you get paid a lot of money for it. Like, okay, I don't know what snake oil you're selling me, but that sounds really interesting, but I'll think about it. But really, that was my polite way of saying I'm not qualified to do that. And I think one of the things that I was grateful that I did, because I did end up pursuing that opportunity and ended up being a fantastic, breaking point from, full-time ministry into co-vocational reality, was I was willing to take a risk of myself.
Hey friends, I want to pause just for a moment. If you're navigating the complex and emotional process of leaving a mission-driven role, whether that's been ministry, nonprofit work, or any purpose-driven career, you're not just looking for a new job. You're wrestling with things like the personal, professional, and spiritual dynamics that come with all of this. Maybe you're asking things like, who am I outside of this role? What skills do I even have that can translate into the future? Will I ever find work that feels meaningful again? If this is resonating, download Finding Your Way to Flourishing. It's a free guide that I've put together for mission-driven leaders who find themselves in the midst of transition. This isn't just another guide, it's a thoughtfully crafted resource that's designed to help you begin processing your identity beyond the role that you're leaving. It can help you pinpoint which skills you can confidently bring into your new and next role. It'll help you lean into your faith and find peace during the midst of this uncertainty. It's not overwhelming, it's not complicated. It's just the first step to getting some clarity and moving forward. You don't have to figure this all out alone, and I'd love to walk this journey with you. This guide is completely free, and you can grab your copy today by clicking the link in the description or in the show notes. Let's start making some sense of this transition together. Okay, now back to the conversation.
I think for a lot of us, we're just too afraid to take that risk. Like, what if I try this and it fails? It's like, well, you won't know until you try. And I think, the training that I had to endure to become a corporate trainer with this company was 5 days unpaid, and only 40% of the participants passed. So I was taking a massive risk by doing this, but I did end up passing, ended up working out great. But I think the couple things from that story that are important for people listening at home to consider is, like, what are people in your orbit telling you? Where, like, Gigi came to me and said, "You'd be really good at this," and I almost blew her off. I was like, "Oh, yeah, whatever. It's not really my thing. I'm not qualified." When people say stuff to you that care about you and love you, like, take it seriously. Like, consider it. And if no one's providing you that feedback, don't be afraid to ask someone, "Hey, like, what are some things that you think I could be doing differently? Like, how can I get better?" My favorite question to ask people is, "What is it like on the other side of me?" And just hear what they say. and, and instead of dismissing it or getting defensive, like, genuinely seeking out feedback. And then the second part of it is saying, like, I could try that. And maybe you're not going to quit your job and go do a brand new job tomorrow. In fact, I would recommend you don't. But start with baby steps, right? Pick up some side projects or do some volunteer work or figure out if this is a domain you want to explore. And like what I find is when you follow your curiosity, new worlds will open. And when you do that, you'll be able to figure out, oh, this is what was missing all along. But if I got stuck in that mindset of, well, I'm not qualified for that, or I don't know how to do that, I would have never taken that leap. I never would have been here today.
Yeah, I can totally resonate with that. You have to take some sort of risk on yourself. I had a very targeted role that I was going after and applied for the job. I was still at the role that I was in, but had applied for a job. There was over 160 applicants. It was a brutal process. Made it down to the final two. The interview process was over the course of like 2 or 3 months. All sorts of like kind of hoops to jump through along the way. Made it down to the final two candidates. Ended up not getting the job. But what that experience showed me was that I had the chops to pursue something different and in this vein of what I was applying for. It gave me, even, it's so strange, but even though I didn't get the job, it gave me all the confidence in the world to pursue something new and different.
Yeah.
And so I totally resonate with what you're saying there.
I know what I love about that story, Evan, is like you weren't afraid to fail. And I think for some people, like I've applied for jobs and interviewed for jobs that I was way underqualified for. And for some people, they're like, why would you even do that? It's like, well, because the worst thing they can say is no. That's it.
Yeah.
They're not going to cut off your finger or beat you up or, tar and feather you and send you out of town. They're going, no, you're not quite the right fit. Okay.
Yep.
And if you make it as far as you did, Evan, like you're going to get so much valuable feedback and intel. And it's going to kind of put that fire in you of like, oh, I am capable for more. But I think there's a lot of people I know, I'm sure you know them too, that wouldn't even cross their mind. Like, I don't want to be rejected. Well, why? What's the big deal? You learn from it, you move on. That's it.
Yeah, you kind of have to deep person, and I don't know if you're into the Enneagram at all, but I relate to type 5s a lot, and in some ways, when it comes, the way I look at feedback is I kind of just look at it as data. Like, it's just information that will help you make better, more informed decisions as you move forward. And so if we can kind of depersonalize the feedback in many ways and use it as data to help us make better decisions, man, it can really help us kind of get over maybe some of the stinging aspects of, oh, I don't like hearing that about myself. Well, it's just going to help you get better.
Spot on. Yeah, when I work with pastors, sometimes I'll get an email like, oh, I was rejected for this job. Like, well, what happened? Well, I applied and they sent me this canned email that says we're not moving forward with their candidacy. I said, oh, so you were rejected. No, your resume was not what they were looking for. They don't know you. They would not pass you. It was like a robot read that. They said this, person B has more qualifications than person S. Therefore, person S, we're not moving forward with you. And people will like feel bad about themselves for 2 weeks because, a robot says you're not quite as qualified as somebody else.
Exactly. So how do you start to help pastors understand what skills they have that can transfer? How do you help them uncover these aspects about themselves that they can use in new roles and in new ways?
Yeah, so within the book, I have 5 chapters. The second chapter is called Discovery, and I think it's really fun to take pastors through this journey of identifying like how has God uniquely wired you, or what brings you life and joy, and let's use those skills and those qualities to find jobs where you'll thrive. So the framework that I use is called the heart, the head, the hands, the feet. So essentially, in short, the heart is kind of the caring, compassionate, loving, gracious, justice-oriented person. So if you're a pastor or somebody who's really just driven by mission or driven by your heart, I would recommend that you look for a job in either a nonprofit or a mission-oriented for-profit, which those do exist. because you probably would not feel very good about yourselves if your only objective was to make more money. You'd want to be somewhere where you said, I'm values driven, I'm values aligned. I cannot just go somewhere and punch a clock. I need to go somewhere where I care. That's the heart position. The head, if you're somebody who's academic, who enjoys reading, writing, research, watching YouTube videos, scholarly journals, speaking, the whole 9 yards, that's learning and development or training and development. You're somebody who's academic and cerebral. That's the path that I chose for my career. I'm someone who likes to wrestle with ideas, and I like to read nonfiction books in my spare time. I listen to podcasts almost nonstop. So that's me. So the hands, are you like fixing things? You like tinkering with things? You like juggling multiple responsibilities, multiple demands? That should be a career in project management. Very high in demand career field in different industries. You can earn certifications such as a PMP. I actually have mine, and that's helped me open doors for opportunities for work. And that's for someone who can manage a lot, can deal with a lot of stress, and can do projects. And the last one's feet. If you're action oriented, you like moving, you like grooving, you like getting stuff done, you like knocking on doors, you like picking up your phone. That's sales. And some pastors think sales is a dirty word, but if you're a ministry, you're actually selling ideas. Every single time you get in the pulpit, every single time you try to recruit a volunteer, you're not selling a physical product, but you're selling a belief. You're selling an idea. You're selling a dream or vision of God's kingdom. And I will say this for any of your listeners who kind of get eked out by the sales word, helping a lot of pastors transition to all 4 of those jobs. When some of these guys and gals call me 6 months later and tell me they're earning, it makes me very sad. I did not choose the sales role. Like, you're lying. You made that much last month. And it's not an easy job. None of these jobs are. But if you are like, I just want to make money, pursue a role in sales.
That framework is incredibly clarifying and a tremendous place for someone that is just swimming in, oh my gosh, how do I make sense out of my ministry experience? What do I do? Where do I start? What am I good at? Like, having that as a foundational basis to even just get you pointed in the right direction, for me, is so incredibly clarifying. Like, immediately I'm like, yep, I'm in the head, in the space that I'm working in right now. Our target audience is people strategy leaders, talent development leaders, learning and development. We use tools in that space. And so, and me personally, I just love growth, development, personal development. So it makes so much sense, man. Great job creating a clarifying framework. That's fantastic.
Yeah, thanks, man.
Do you ever have individuals that you have to kind of sell that idea on, or still like, I don't know what the value of my ministry experience is? Like, do you ever have to sell them on that, or help them dig a little deeper?
Yeah, most definitely. I think there's one of 2 extremes that happens with people I work with, because obviously, like, finding the lane you want to swim in is half the battle. The other part of the battle is like, where do I fit in an organization based on my skills and experience? So I'll be on the phone with a guy who's a 26-year-old youth pastor, who's got 40 kids in his youth group, and says, oh yeah, I saw this job for like senior director of training at Amazon. It's fully remote and it pays $280 a year. You think I should apply? I'm like, no, like, don't waste your time. You are way underqualified for that job. You need to find something that's 60K a year, entry level, new grad. Like, that's more of your speed. That happens. The opposite also happens where you have that executive church pastor who's, led a staff of 80 and a $15 million a year budget, and they send me a link for a entry level, like, learning and development job. Like, oh, you think I should apply for this? I'm like, you're really overqualified for that. So I think it's a matter of kind of where do I fit organizationally? And where it gets kind of muddy, and the book breaks this down, is organizations are complex, right? Working at a place like Amazon is going to be vastly different than working for a 3-person firm in your town for a variety of reasons. So you have to figure out, do I want to work for a big conglomerate or a multinational firm, or do I want to work for, Joe's Flowers on Main Street of your downtown. Like you have to figure that part out. What kind of company do I want to be in?
Mm-hmm.
Small, medium, or large?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I think that's kind of the biggest one. The other challenge though is that for most pastors, and I think this is important that I share this, you likely are going to take a step backwards in responsibility in your first job post ministry if you go that route. And the reason why that is because it's just no matter how much you try to message your transferable skills, companies say, yeah, but you haven't done that here,
Mm-hmm.
or you haven't done that in this industry.
Mm-hmm.
I understand that you had a board that looked to you for leadership. I understand that you had 4 or 5 staff. I understand that you had, a $500,000 or $1 million budget, but you haven't done that here. Therefore, we're going to start you a little bit lower. That's the bad news. The good news is you're going to scale up substantially faster than the average Joe or the average Jane because you have such rich experience in ministry.
Mm-hmm.
So you might look at a role and be like, wait, why am I having at the same title as someone who just graduated college when I'm 36? It's like, well, because you don't have quite the same, quite the level of experience that they're looking for because you haven't worked in an industry. I've had pastors tell me, and I'll stop here, like I got a job and I was a better leader than my boss, and I was a better leader than my boss's boss. And that was like a real piece of humble pie when I first started off in my career. I'm like, I get it. I felt that way as well.
Mm-hmm.
But the good news is if you play your cards right, you'll climb much faster because of your rich ministry experience.
Yeah, that's super encouraging. I think one of the things that could play into this as well is values.
Mm-hmm.
In this process for you and during your journey, were there certain values or principles that became like increasingly more clear to you? Like even just personal values, things that you valued as an individual. If so, like what were those values and how have you seen them helping to shape this path that you're on?
Yeah, I think one of the things I feel very strongly about is people spend most of their waking hours at work. So finding ways to help people either find good jobs or make their current jobs better, have them get more satisfaction or enjoyment out of their jobs is something that's really important to me. So the current organization I work for is in workforce development in my day job, where I train 18 to 29-year-olds from underserved backgrounds on how to get corporate jobs. So I was just with a group of leaders last week in Austin. These are young adults who are from, a lot of them from the inner city, a lot of them are immigrants, a lot of them are, coming from working class or poor families, and they're going to go intern at Apple in 2 months. And I love that. Like that gives me so much life and so much joy. I'd much rather do that than sit in a room with a bunch of leaders who went to, you know, Harvard or Yale or Wharton and they have MBAs and are looking at me like, yeah, what are you going to tell me? There's someone out there who's jazzed up about working with those really high level executives. I'd rather work with people like pastors, like folks transitioning in their careers, kind of in that white water of confusion. Where do I need to go? Helping them figure out their next step. That's my sweet spot. So yeah, helping people find jobs, sustain jobs that fulfill them is a passion of mine.
That's fantastic. Yeah. When I was in the midst of this, I took some time to just try to clarify and identify what are the just like we have core values in organizations, just like we have core values that shape our church and help set the expectation for how we behave and what kind of team we're going to be and how we're going to treat each other. I wrote down a list of 4 or 5 core values that were deeply personal to me, but also would represent the type of individuals and team that I would be a part of. And in the process of identifying new opportunities or organizations to be a part of, a lot of places post their values on their website, or you can kind of start to get a sense or an idea of their values if you're following them on Instagram or whatever other social media platform. So like taking the time to clarify and understand what are the things that are truly meaningful and important to you as an individual and in the roles that you want to serve in can really help narrow down and clarify how you're going to move forward.
Yeah, really well said. And the thing of it is too, and I want to double click on this because that was so powerful. Is you don't have to feel bad about your values. Like if you're like, I want to work somewhere that's kind of quirky, like write that down. That's
Mhm.
okay. I want to work
Mhm.
somewhere where we have silly backgrounds on Zoom and we wear hats on Fridays. Like cool, do
Mhm.
it. Like you
Mhm.
know that about yourself. You don't want to be somewhere that's too stuffy or too buttoned up. One of the things that I had to get over in my own journey is I went to work somewhere where I'm able to drop off and pick up my kids from school. That is really important to me. And there's nothing wrong with having a job where you can't do that. But I knew that for me, my kids are only young once. My father worked in a factory. He could never get me from school because he was in the factory working during those hours. So being able to be like at my kid's school at 2:45 to walk her home from school and having that 30-minute block in my day, that 4 out of 5 days of the week I can do that is pretty freaking awesome.
Mhm.
So writing those things down and getting crystal clear on this is what I want and not feeling bad about it. That's okay.
Mhm. Absolutely, man. Absolutely. Um, you know, obviously faith has been a part of this
Uh-huh.
process for you. And have there been any moments of uncertainty along the way? And how did you experience God's guidance? Like, how did you understand that or perceive it?
Yeah, I'll tell a story here. Towards the end of my time at All Saints Church, one of our earliest members passed away due to alcohol poisoning. He was 38, 39 years old. He was from a West Indian family, and I went to the funeral. I spoke at the funeral, and I just remember being so out of my comfort zone. For one, burying a man who was around the same age as I was at the time,
Mm.
for starters. Saying, kind of consoling his mother who's grieving the loss of her only son, in a completely different culture than the one that I grew up in.
Mhm.
And feeling so like unequipped and feeling so not helpful and feeling like I'm just so awkward and like don't know what to say in this moment. And I was not prepared for this level of ministry or care.
Mhm.
And I remember getting back to my apartment from the funeral. It was raining that evening, and my kids were already in bed because it was like the middle of the night. My wife was already in bed. I just walked out to the fire escape of my building in the Bronx and just stood there like staring like into the abyss of the dark alleyway behind my building with the rain kind of falling. I was kind of protected because of the rafter on top of me, but being like, what am I doing right now? Like, what am I doing with my life? Like, what the heck did I just say back there? Like, not that I say anything wrong or bad, but I just felt like I'm so like not useful in this
Mhm.
moment.
Mhm.
And just really feeling like, you know what? Like, God called me to this. He called me to be a presence. He called me to be a source of his love to the people that were there grieving, especially, his name was Ron, especially to Ron's mom. And I didn't do it perfectly. Nobody would do it perfectly because how would you?
Mhm.
And recognizing that like this was God's hand and his calling for that moment, that season, and being okay with that and being okay with just being a presence and not being good enough. So I think that was one of the biggest things for me is like when you're in ministry, you feel like you have to have all the answers. You
Mhm.
feel like you have to know everything, to be able to like know everything about everything. And I think in my time in ministry, especially in that environment, recognizing that just showing up, just doing that is 90% of the work. And if
Mhm.
you can just do that, you'll be okay.
Mhm. I would add to that, not just are you going to be okay, but the people that you're showing up for
Yeah.
are going to be okay. Like
Yeah.
with just you just showing up, not having all the right answers, not knowing what to say, not knowing what to do, but your presence. They'll be okay with that.
Yeah. Yeah. To this day, the mom and I still text and check in with each other. So
Mhm.
Ron shares a birthday with one of my daughters. So I always know when it's his birthday. So I always text the mom and praying for you. And I'm here for you if you need anything. And yeah, I just think I'd encourage anybody listening that in our inadequacies is where God moves and where God works. And you can sit on the fire escape and feel sorry for yourself or recognize that you did exactly what God called you to do in that moment and rest
Mhm.
in that.
Mhm. Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that, Eric. Um, what's what's something that you wished, or that you would, if you could go back, tell yourself, or wish you'd known when you began this journey, that might encourage someone else facing a similar season today. Like they're in it right now. They're maybe where you were a couple years back, 3 years back. What would you want to say to them?
Yeah, man, if I could go back to that season of figuring out what's next and lots of confusion and uncertainty, I think the thing I would say, it's very basic, is you're going to be okay.
Mm.
You're going to be okay. I know it might not feel like that in the moment, but you're gonna be okay. You're gonna come out on the other side of this. Things are gonna shake out, and just to believe that, and just to have faith and confidence that God's got you. And I hate to have a Christian cliche on your podcast, but I think that was the thing that I needed to hear, and that God's love for you is not tied to your performance. That was probably the second thing I would say. So you're going to be okay, and God's love for you is not tied to your performance.
I love that, man. That is something that I personally have been attempting to disassociate's not the right word, but in the context of my relationship with God, how do I live and be in relationship and even with others less from a place of performance and more from a place of just genuineness and authenticity and just care. So well said, Eric. It's not cliche. People do need to hear that. People do need to understand that it's going to be okay. And it's sometimes easier for us on the other side of things. However, if I've made it through, if you've made it through, and numbers and numbers and numbers of others have made it through,
right,
you're going to make it through too.
Yeah. And, the thing of it is like trials are what form us, right? I don't know about you, Evan, but I never looked back and thought, man, that day at the beach where I just did nothing but lay on my towel, that was so transformative. It felt good, and we need that, right? We need time to rest, but where are we changed? Where are we transformed? Through challenges and through trials.
Exactly. Well, Eric, thank you for this conversation. Where can people connect with you? Where can they learn about your book? Where can they access the resources that you offer?
Yeah, thank you so much again for having me, Evan. So Twitter is my name, ERICHOKE. The website is ihelppastorsgetjobs.com. You can actually buy the book directly from me. I appreciate it if you do that, because I'll make a little bit more money to support the ministry. But if you buy it from Amazon, that's okay too. I appreciate the support either way. But thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely, Eric. Glad we could do this. And thank you, everyone, for being here and for listening.